Hi, my name is Gwen Shilcock, and my term project is on climate change's effects on health in Ohio in the United States versus Beijing and China. Similarities between the two, there are temperate zones with some subtropical areas, similar latitudes, and similar distance to the equator. Differences between the two, Ohio has a higher average maximum temperature, around 62 degrees Fahrenheit, and an average minimum temperature around 43 degrees Fahrenheit, while Beijing has an average maximum temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit and average minimum temperature of 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Ohio gets more rain though, 1,062 millimeters per year and 112.8 rain days. Beijing had only 511 millimeters and 54 rain days. Ohio had less sun than Beijing though, 2,190 hours of sun and 2,592 hours of sun for Beijing. So climate change in Ohio is in the form of extreme heat waves, heat stress, heat stroke, cardiovascular disease, and kidney disease increases. There was a heat wave from 1988, which is now the new normal, which is 21 days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit in Cuyahoga County. It'll be 46 days in 2080. There's also air pollution in the form of ground level ozone smog. This is the picture to the right, Cincinnati with ground level ozone smog. It makes it harder for those with asthma and chronic respiratory disease to breathe. There's 19 counties, including Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, which have ozone levels above EPA standards. Ohio is also experiencing longer pollen seasons, so there's more pollen leading to a higher risk of allergies and increased or worsened allergies that like pre-existing allergies, worsened pre-existing allergies, and higher risk of asthma attacks. Ohio also is experiencing extreme storms and floods, increases in disease exposure from heavy rain, increased flooding and precipitation, 49% more rain over the last 60 years in Ohio. And then from this, there's drinking water contamination and algae blooms from runoff. And there's an increased risk of infectious disease from insects, from increased humidity, temperatures, and shifting rain patterns. So there's an increased incidence of West Nile virus from mosquitoes and Lyme disease from ticks. Parts of Ohio are future expansion zones for deer ticks, according to a climate-based model. This is how heavy downpours can increase disease risk exposure. So climate change increases heavy downpours, so streams and rivers rise. Floodwaters can become contaminated with agricultural waste, chemicals, raw sewage, and this contains bacteria, viruses, and parasites. The sewage overflow from treatment plants, septic fields, and municipal lines backs up into people's homes, and the flooded materials can cause mold to grow and be inhaled. Beijing, China is also experiencing increased heat-related risks, especially heat-related mortality. So there's a higher risk of mortality for people with respiratory and or cardiovascular conditions, and there's also more incidences of respiratory and cardiovascular conditions. In addition, there's increasing population, and aging also increase the risk of heat-related death. And so there's two scenarios. If the climate were to be stabilized, cardiovascular death may increase up to 69%, but if climate change continues, cardiovascular death can increase up to 135%. And then to the right is a diagram of air pollution occurring in China. In Beijing, China, they're experiencing extreme dust events with airborne bacteria. And especially extreme one happened during March of 2021, where bacteria up to 4 times higher than non-dust days were found in the atmosphere. Um, this came from dust blown from the Taklamakan Desert. There's a diagram above where it shows Beijing on March 11th, and March 15th it's covered in dust, and March 16th it's pretty much back to normal. The percent gram-positive bacteria resistant to antibiotics was changed due to the dust storm. Some bacteria had their resistance increased and some had it decreased. Overall, though, antibiotic resistance increased by 14 times after the dust event. And opportunistic bacteria found after the dust event was due to diversity increases in bacteria. Beijing is also experiencing waterlogging from extreme precipitation, which is oversaturation of soil, so there's an increased risk of flood, and there can be death from traffic accidents during extreme rainfall and flooding, which is what the picture is showing to the right. This is mostly during the summer and mostly south of where there is urbanization, and the annual rainfall is decreasing, but chance of extreme precipitation has increased. So when it does rain, it rains a lot. There's also an increase in infectious disease from insects in Beijing, China. Increased cases are seen above 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot weather increases reproduction and activity of mosquitoes that spread dengue and malaria. Densely populated areas make it easier for it to spread. So here's a summary. As you can see, Ohio and Beijing, they share these highlighted aspects, which is climate change. So they're experiencing similar climate change, except the dust storms in Beijing. Ohio has a higher risk for disease exposure because it has more rain. Beijing also has a higher risk, but not as high as Ohio because it has less rain. And some related topics to explore later on. Why does Beijing receive less rain and more sun but lower average temperatures than Ohio? Or in other words, why does Ohio have more rain and less sun but has higher average temperatures than Beijing? Do we experience dust storms anywhere in the USA? How often do dust storms occur in Beijing? Is there any warning before they happen? How is climate change different from areas at latitudes that are different from Ohio and Beijing's latitudes? And do you have any other questions that you can think of? And references?